There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a crowd when something happens that nobody planned for. Not the organizers, not the cameras, not the thousands of people standing in the cold holding flowers they had been gripping for hours. It is not a quiet silence. It is the kind of silence where every breath holds, where someone in the back of the crowd stops mid-sentence and forgets what they were saying, where a child tugs at a sleeve and the parent does not look down. It is the silence of recognition, of something being felt all at once by people who have never met and never will. That is the silence that fell over Britain on a June morning in 2024, when Catherine, Princess of Wales, a woman who had not stood before the public in months, a woman the world had watched disappear slowly and quietly into an illness that no palace statement had fully explained, stepped out of a car, straightened herself, and walked forward. She wore blue. A simple blue dress, pale enough to catch the light, but not bright enough to announce itself. She looked, and this is the word that kept appearing in the messages people sent each other that day, in the texts and the social media posts and the quiet conversations at kitchen tables. She looked like herself again. Not a version of herself. Not a managed, carefully staged version designed to reassure the public. Herself. And that, to the people who had been watching and waiting and quietly worrying, was the most extraordinary thing of all. To understand why that moment hit the way it did, you have to go back to the beginning of 2024. January, a month that had been quietly routine in all the ways royal January usually is. Events on the calendar, engagements announced, the machinery of public life ticking forward. Then, Kensington Palace released a statement. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had undergone abdominal surgery at the London clinic. She would be in hospital for up to 2 weeks. She would be recovering at home after that. She would not be returning to public duties until after Easter. The statement was measured. Clinical. The kind of thing designed to tell people enough without telling them anything. The public was politely instructed not to worry. People worried. It was not unreasonable to worry. The surgery had been described as planned, but no further details were given. No cause, no context, no explanation beyond the word abdominal, and the quiet expectation that everyone would simply wait and not ask too many questions. For a family that had always lived under extraordinary scrutiny, every smile photographed, every outing documented, every appearance noted and analyzed and dissected, the sudden absence of Catherine from public view felt strange in a way that was difficult to articulate. She was simply gone. The calendar had engagements where her name used to be and now had nothing. William stepped back from duties briefly. The children were at school, and somewhere behind the walls of the Adelaide cottage on the Windsor estate, Kate was recovering from something that nobody was telling anyone about. Britain waited. The way it waits, not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. Flowers began appearing outside the gates of royal residences without any particular occasion to explain them. People sent messages, get well cards. The newspapers ran daily updates that said nothing new, but were read carefully anyway, each paragraph scanned for something hidden between the careful language. On Mother's Day, a photograph was released. Kate, seated at home with her 3 children beside her, George, Charlotte, and Louis, all of them looking into the camera with the comfortable ease of a family that did not know it was being watched or did not mind. The photograph was ordinary, and it was warm, and it made people exhale. She was there. She was smiling. She was home. And then the photograph was pulled. News agencies began flagging inconsistencies in the image, small digital discrepancies, a sleeve that did not sit quite right, background details that did not match. Kensington Palace confirmed that the photograph had been edited. Kate herself released a short statement acknowledging that she occasionally experimented with editing and apologizing for the confusion it had caused. The apology was quiet and personal and entirely human. It was also in the context of the increasingly anxious speculation surrounding her health, immediately picked apart by people who had already started to wonder whether the world was being kept from something larger. The internet, which had been holding its breath politely since January, inhaled and began talking. The weeks that followed were strange. There were video sightings, a clip of a car driving through Windsor, figures glimpsed through a window. The palace confirmed that the princess had been seen privately at various engagements. People who had been entirely reasonable up until that point found themselves dissecting 15 seconds of footage from a car window, trying to confirm with certainty that the woman in the passenger seat was who the palace said she was. It was in retrospect the particular madness of a public that genuinely cared and had been given nothing solid to hold on to. When people care about someone and are told very little, they fill the space with whatever they can find. On the 22nd of March, the space was filled. William and Kate sat together on a bench in the grounds of Windsor, surrounded by the clean light of a spring afternoon that the camera had caught perfectly. Kate wore a casual jacket. Her hair was down. She looked at the camera directly, and she spoke, and the words she said changed everything that had come before and everything that would come after. She had been diagnosed with cancer. The surgery in January had been to remove something, and while it had been carried out successfully, the follow-up analysis had found something. Cancer. She was undergoing preventive chemotherapy. She did not know yet when she would be back. She asked for time, for space, for the quiet the family needed to process something that no amount of royal training prepares a person for. And as she spoke, her voice steady but carrying the particular weight of words that had been chosen very carefully because the wrong ones would break something, William sat beside her. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence was its own statement, the kind that does not require language. The world stopped, not metaphorically. The kind of stop that happens when something large and unexpected lands, the quiet descending on television studios mid-broadcast, the social media feeds pausing in that particular way they do, when everyone suddenly shifts from posting to reading, the conversations cutting off in the middle of words. She had cancer. Catherine, 42 years old, mother of 3, Princess of Wales. She had cancer, and she had been going through it quietly behind the walls of Windsor while the world speculated, and the newspapers ran headlines, and people on the internet argued about whether the Mother's Day photograph had been manipulated. She had been sick this whole time, and she had told them herself. What followed in the weeks after the announcement was something that resists clean description. There was an outpouring. That word is used so casually that it has lost most of its meaning, but it applies here with unusual accuracy. It poured. Flowers, messages, letters, tributes from strangers who had never met her and had no particular reason to feel personally affected, and yet clearly, undeniably did. Some of the messages were from people who had been through cancer themselves. Some were from their families. Some were from people who simply said, in various ways and various languages, that she had been part of their lives in ways they hadn't quite measured until the moment they thought they might lose her. The public had known her for years, since before William, since university photographs and a fashion show runway and a dress at a polo match that a certain prince had noticed. They had watched her become something. A wife, a mother, a working royal, a woman who showed up consistently and quietly and gave the impression that she was genuinely glad to be wherever she was. And now they sat with the knowledge that while they had been watching, something had been happening to her that she had carried alone. The months between March and June were quiet in the way that only something very loud can be quiet. The silence of a conversation that everyone is having, but not yet with the person it is about. William appeared at events solo. He smiled when smiling was required and did what was required of him, but there was something different about the way he carried himself through those months that people noticed without being able to name. He looked like a man moving through his days with a weight that was not yet behind him. He looked like a husband managing 2 things at once: the ordinary demands of public life and the entirely private business of being the person a sick woman came home to every night. He kept going. He always kept going. But Kate was coming back. That was the thing the public clung to from March onward. The knowledge that she had said she wanted to return, that she was working toward it, that the treatment was ongoing, but the direction was forward. People who had followed the royal family in passing found themselves checking for updates with the kind of frequency normally reserved for people they personally knew. Something about her openness, the bench, the direct camera, the careful words, and the uncried tears visible just beneath them had brought her closer than the years of public appearances had managed. She had let them in, not with detail, not with drama, but with the simple act of sitting down and telling the truth. And that truth had made her real in a way that a princess, by the ordinary logic of public life, is not supposed to be. The world counted the days to Easter. Easter came. She was not yet back. They counted to summer. And on a morning in June, standing outside in the London light with her husband beside her and 3 children somewhere behind palace walls waiting for their mother to come home and tell them how it had gone, Catherine, Princess of Wales, walked forward. The crowd had been gathered for Trooping the Color, the annual military spectacle, the birthday parade, the kind of event that runs on ceremony and precision and the deep organizational comfort of something that has happened the same way for generations. Flags, uniforms, the particular English pageantry that a certain section of the world finds magnificent and another section finds absurd and everyone agrees is at least entirely committed to itself. The crowd knew she might come. They had been told she might come. But there's a distance between knowing something and it actually happening, and when the car arrived and the door opened and she stepped out, the silence happened first. Then something else, something harder to name, a sound that was not quite a cheer and not quite a cry and was somehow both a collective exhale and inhale happening at the same moment, a wave of recognition moving through the crowd from the point where she had appeared outward in every direction, washing over people who had been standing in a field watching a military parade and were suddenly standing in the middle of something they hadn't prepared themselves to feel. She was back. She was standing in the light in her blue dress, and she was looking at the people who had waited for her, and something in her expression, not a performance, not a managed composure, but a real and visible thing, told anyone watching that she knew exactly what this moment cost and what it meant. William stood close, not holding her hand, not touching her arm, just close. The particular closeness of a person who has been through something enormous with someone else and has learned, in the learning, a kind of proximity that does not need to perform itself. The children appeared. George, Charlotte, Louis. They walked out with the easy confidence of children who have grown up in front of cameras and learned very young that standing still and looking pleasant is simply part of what days sometimes contain. They stood together, the 5 of them, on one of the most photographed patches of ground in England, and for a moment the ceremony and the flags and the precision of the whole vast organized spectacle became backdrop. What was in front was a family that had been through something, standing together in the light, having come through it. The nation, watching from living rooms and from the crowd, and from the other side of the world through small phone screens, felt it all at once. Not every story that matters is loud. Not every turning point announces itself with the vocabulary of transformation. Sometimes a woman simply steps out of a car in a blue dress and walks forward, and the world, which had been waiting without quite understanding how much it had been waiting, finally breathes. What nobody tells you about watching someone return from something serious. An illness, a long absence, a disappearance into a version of their life that the rest of the world is not allowed to see, is that it does not resolve cleanly. The relief is real. It floods in the moment the door opens and the familiar face appears, and it is not a small thing, that flood. But underneath it, traveling alongside it the way a current runs beneath calm water, is something that sits differently. The awareness that the return is not the same as the repair. That the person walking back out into the light has been through something in the dark, and the light does not erase it. It only makes it visible again. In the weeks after Trooping the Color, Britain tried to hold both things at once. The joy of Kate being back, and the knowledge, quieter and harder to sit with, that she was not entirely well. Not yet. The chemotherapy was ongoing, she had said. The treatment would continue for several more months. She was making progress. She was glad to be there. But that there was not the same there she had left in January, because she had changed in the crossing the way all people change when they move through something that leaves a mark. She had said so herself, in the words chosen with the precision of someone who has had too much time in hospital rooms and home recoveries, to think about exactly what she wants to say. She had talked about vulnerability, about a new perspective on everything, about humility. These are words people use when they mean something they cannot yet fully name, when the language available to describe what they have been through is not quite adequate to the experience. She used them carefully, and they carried their weight. Through June and July, she appeared in public in the calibrated way of someone learning to manage something new. Wimbledon, the royal box. That particular setting that belongs to her in the way few public spaces belong to a single person. She had been going there for years, had been photographed there in every kind of weather and every kind of mood, had watched matches from that box with the focused attention of someone who genuinely loves the sport rather than the theater of attending it. In July 2024, she arrived with Princess Charlotte beside her and Pippa Matthews, her sister-in-law, and the crowd in the stands did what crowds at Wimbledon do when they see her. They stood, not politely, not with the restrained appreciation of an audience at a formal event. They stood the way people stand when they cannot stay sitting, when something in their body tells them that sitting is insufficient to what they are feeling. Charlotte, 9 years old, sat next to her mother and looked up at the noise. Kate smiled. The smile was small and private and aimed at her daughter before it widened and aimed itself outward at the crowd. And something in the sequence of that, the small smile first, the daughter first, the public face second, told the people watching that she was a mother first and a princess second, and that the distinction was not new but felt newly visible in a way that the months of absence had made possible. When you go, people see you differently when you come back. The invisibility you had accumulated across years of simply being present. The way familiar things become wallpaper, lifts. They see you fresh. And what they saw in that Wimbledon box on that summer afternoon was a woman who had come close to something and stepped back from it, and who was now sitting in the sun with her daughter in what appeared to be, in every way that mattered, ordinary life. William, meanwhile, was doing what William does in public, existing with the specific quality of a man who has been trained from birth to embody steadiness, and who had, over the course of this particular year, needed to actually be it rather than just perform it. He had continued with his schedule through Kate's absence. He had shown up to events and smiled for photographs and said the right things in the right places with the practiced ease of someone who has been doing it for decades. He had also, in the gaps between the appearances and the official statements, been a father to 3 children who were watching their mother go through something frightening and needed someone to tell them, with conviction and consistency, that it would be all right. He had been a husband to a woman navigating an illness that carries, regardless of rank or resources, its full weight of fear and uncertainty and physical cost. He had carried all of it without public complaint. When he said to a reporter in November that the year had been brutal, just that word, brutal, with the particular bluntness of a man who has run out of diplomatic language for something, it landed like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Of course it had been brutal. Anyone who had been paying attention knew it had been brutal. But hearing him say it confirmed that the steadiness had not been ease. It had been effort. Tremendous, continuous, unglamorous effort. In October, Kate made a decision that told people something without stating it directly. She and William traveled to Southport, unannounced. No press release, no advance notice to the public, no carefully orchestrated arrival. They came quietly, as privately as 2 of the most recognized people in Britain can come anywhere, to meet the families of 3 young girls who had been killed in a knife attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class in July. B.B. King had been 6. Elsie Stankham had been 7. Alice de Silva Aguiar had been 9. They had walked into a class one summer morning to dance and had not come home. The town had been holding that grief since July, carrying it with the particular exhausted heaviness of a community that has been through something no community should be asked to go through. And when William and Kate arrived in October, it was the first public engagement Kate had undertaken since completing chemotherapy. She did not have to be there. She was still, by any reasonable measure, in recovery. The palace had made no announcement of her coming. She was there because she had decided to be there, because the families in that room were the parents of children who had not survived something, and Kate was a parent who was still here, still working through the far side of her own frightening thing. And the distance between those two positions was something she appeared to feel in her body as she moved through the room. She spoke to the parents. She thanked the emergency workers who had arrived at the scene in July and stayed at it long after any reasonable shift had ended, absorbing something into themselves that would need to be processed for years. She told them they were heroes. She told them to take care of themselves. She said these things with the directness of someone who means them and knows precisely what they cost to say. When William and Kate left, they posted a short statement. The words were careful, but the care was genuine, the kind you can distinguish from the performed kind if you have spent enough time watching both. They said that meeting the community had been a powerful reminder of the importance of supporting one another. They said the families would remain in their thoughts and prayers. They said they continued to stand with Southport. These were the official words. But the unofficial thing, the thing that the people in that community center understood, and the town understood, and the country understood, watching from outside, was that Kate had given something she did not entirely have yet to spare. She was still recovering. She had come anyway. November arrived with its particular gray quality, the English autumn settling into the particular shade of overcast that is neither dramatic nor gentle, but simply consistent, the kind of sky that matches the mood of a country carrying a full year of something heavy. Remembrance Weekend. The Festival of Remembrance at the Royal Albert Hall, and then the Cenotaph on Sunday, the two occasions that sit at the center of the national calendar with a weight that the other events, the pageantry, and the celebrations do not carry. This is the mourning season, the season of poppies and silence, and the particular British relationship with loss, which is old and practiced and exists somewhere between dignity and repression and comes out once a year in public with a clarity that the rest of the year does not permit. Kate arrived at the Royal Albert Hall in a black dress coat with a red poppy at her chest. She sat in the royal box and watched the tributes unfold. The veterans, the music, the ceremonial grief that a country performs for its dead. At one point, during a standing ovation for the veterans assembled below, something crossed her face. Emotion, visible and undisguised in the way that real emotion always differs from performed emotion. It arrives before the person has decided how to feel about being seen feeling it. She was moved. She was in that moment, not a princess attending a ceremony, but a person in a room full of people who had been through things, watching other people who had also been through things, and feeling the weight of all of it at once. The cameras caught it. They always catch it. And the people watching, from the hall, from home, from screens around the world, saw a woman who had spent much of the year managing her own private fight while maintaining the composure that the public life of royalty demands, and who in this moment, in the safe company of people gathered to honor loss, allowed something to show. It was not a performance of emotion. It was the actual thing. And the country, which had been watching Kate perform composure with such consistent precision for so long, recognized the difference immediately. William was watching her. Not constantly. He was present in the hall, engaged with the ceremony, but with the particular quality of attention that a person pays to someone they have been worried about. The kind of glance that is not anxious exactly, but is alert, checking, confirming. The small domestic reassurance that the people who love each other perform 100 times a day without noticing they're doing it, but which becomes visible when it happens in a public room with cameras pointed at it. He looked at her. She was fine. He looked back at the stage. This, in its quiet, small way, was its own kind of statement about what the year had built between them. Sunday, the Cenotaph, the national act of remembrance, carried out in the same way every year with the same precision, the same silence, the same absolute stillness that descends over central London for the 2 minutes that the whole country stops. Kate stood in the group of royals assembled at the memorial. She wore black, as they all did. She wore her poppy. She stood straight. The 2 minutes passed in the way 2 minutes of genuine silence always pass. Longer than 2 minutes, full of something, the silence itself carrying the weight of all the things that are not being said. When it ended, the world moved again. The people who had watched the Festival of Remembrance and had seen her face and had recognized in it the thing that moves across a person when they're overwhelmed. Those people were here too, watching. And the thing many of them noticed and mentioned to each other afterward was that Kate looked present. Fully, completely, undeniably present. Not enduring the occasion. Not performing her attendance. Actually there. The distinction is subtle and entirely real. And when a person has spent months being absent from public life, from the familiar rhythms of a public role, from the world that had known them in one way, the quality of their presence when they return reads differently. Every moment of being there carries the weight of the months of not being there. She had been through something. She was still going through something, the long tail of it, the part that does not resolve at the end of chemotherapy, but simply shifts into a different register. The learning to be in the body again. The recalibration of what ordinary days feel like, the work of putting weight back on a life that the illness had stripped down. None of this was visible exactly, but it was felt. A country that had been watching her for years and had spent most of 2024 watching for her, rather than watching her, had developed a sensitivity to the small things. The way she carried herself, the way she looked at William and he looked back, the way she stood at the cenotaph in the November gray and held herself steady. December came, and with it the carol service at Westminster Abbey, an event she hosts annually, the Christmas gathering that has become something like a signature event, hers in the way only things you have built over years become yours. She stood at the front of the Abbey in the candlelight, and the music moved through the space the way music moves through old buildings, with a resonance that architecture and occasion conspire to produce. The families who had been invited, people connected to the causes she supports, people who had written to her during her illness, people who were there for reasons that had nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with the quiet work she does when the cameras are not pointed at her, filled the pews. She looked, that evening, like someone who had come home to something. Not the home of a building or a royal estate. The home of purpose, of being back in the current of the work that gives the public role its meaning. Standing in a room with people who need something, providing the thing that only presence provides, which is the simple confirmation that they are worth showing up for. Kate had always understood this. It was visible in her from the early years of her public life, the way she engaged with people. Not performing engagement, but actually engaging, leaning in, asking the questions that land differently than the polite ones. The illness had taken her out of rooms like this for nearly a year. She was back in them now, and the year had done something to her that rooms like this could see if they knew how to look. It had made her visible in the deepest sense. Not more famous, not more photographed, but more known, more real. The distance that celebrity places between a public figure and the people watching them had, through the medium of a video on a bench in Windsor, and the truth it carried, closed. The year was nearly done. 2024, the year that William had called brutal and Kate had called incredibly tough, and that the country had spent watching with the particular investment people bring to things they cannot help. It had been a year of waiting and worrying and checking for updates and feeling things about people they had never met in ways that surprised them. It had been, in its strange way, a shared experience. The private experience of a family and the public experience of a nation running in parallel, separated by palace walls and protocol and the deep traditions of royal privacy, but touching at the edges. What touched at the edges was care. It was that simple and that large. People cared about Kate, this woman they had never spoken to, who did not know their names, who moved through the world in conditions of security and wealth and privilege that bear no relationship to ordinary life. And they had discovered how much they care by the quality of the anxiety they felt when she disappeared and the quality of the relief they felt when she came back. Care cannot be performed at scale. It cannot be manufactured by good press or careful management or a well-timed photograph on Mother's Day. It arrives when it arrives because something in the person being cared about is genuinely felt. Kate had always had something that provoked it. The warmth that reads as real because it is real. The focus on people that is not about the cameras. The mother who happens to also be a princess rather than the other way around. The year had not created the care. It had just made it visible, the way depth only becomes apparent when the surface is disturbed. She was still here. She was back. And the country, which had spent 12 months holding something it hadn't quite named, finally had somewhere to put it down on the 14th of January, 2025. A short message appeared on the official account of the Prince and Princess of Wales. It was brief. It was not accompanied by a ceremony or a press conference or a carefully staged event. It was simply a few sentences in Kate's voice, posted to the internet the way a person might tell a friend something they had been wanting to say for a long time and had finally found the language for. She was in remission. The cancer treatment was complete. She had visited the Royal Marsden Hospital in London, the place where she had been treated, and she was able to say, with the weight of a year and a half of something enormous behind her, that it was over. Not over the way a page turns, not the clean over of a story ending, but the over of the hardest part having passed, and the next part beginning with the knowledge of what it cost. It is a relief to now be in remission, she wrote. And then, as anyone who has experienced a cancer diagnosis will know, it takes time to adjust to a new normal. She was talking about herself. She was also talking to every person who had ever sat in a waiting room, held a phone with a number they were afraid to dial, watched someone they loved go through treatment, and not known what to say or do or be. She had been writing for a nation for years. Speeches, statements, carefully worded expressions of sympathy and support for causes and communities, but nothing she had written had landed quite the way this did. Because this was not crafted for an audience. This was simply true, and the truth of it resonated in the particular way that truth always does when it comes from someone who has earned the right to say it. The new normal. Those two words. They're the words people reach for when they're trying to explain to themselves and others what it means to be on the other side of something that changes you. Not destroyed, not restored to the previous version of yourself, but standing in a third place that is neither where you were nor where you feared you might end up. It is the place where people who have been through cancer tend to live afterward. Not untouched, not broken, something harder to name than either. Adjusted, recalibrated, in possession of a kind of knowledge that cannot be unfound. Kate had named it honestly, and in naming it she had done something that the public role of the Princess of Wales, the ribbon cuttings and the charity visits and the appearances at Trooping the Color, had not prepared anyone to expect. She had spoken from inside the human experience rather than from above it. She had met people where they actually are rather than where the ceremony of public life requires them to perform being. And the response, which came in the hours and days after the announcement, the way responses to genuine things always come. Not in the choreographed outpourings of orchestrated moments, but in the quiet accumulation of individual human reactions, confirmed that the meeting had been felt. Messages arrived in thousands. From people who had been through their own diagnoses. From people who were still in the middle of treatment and wanted her to know she had made it easier to be there. From people who had lost someone and were grateful that she had spoken about the fear and the uncertainty rather than simply about the victory of recovery. From people who had simply been watching and waiting and caring in their private way for over a year and now had the news they had been carrying the hope of for months. They wrote to her as they write to someone they know, not a princess, not a representative of an institution, but a person who had been honest with them during one of the most human things a person can go through, and in doing so had made the distance between them something other than unbridgeable. What had happened between March 2024, when Kate sat on a bench and told the world she had cancer, and January 2025, when she announced she was in remission, was not only a medical story. It was a story about what happens to the relationship between a public figure and the public when the figure in question is willing to be, in the most unguarded and unmanageable sense, human. The monarchy as an institution is built on distance, on ceremony, on the careful management of image and occasion and access. There are very good reasons for this, and very old ones, and the people inside the institution understand them with a thoroughness that the people outside can observe but not entirely feel. The distance is structural. It is what allows the institution to function as an institution rather than as a collection of people who simply have the misfortune of being perpetually observed. But Kate on that bench with that video had done something that cut through the distance entirely. Not because she chose to perform intimacy. She did not. She was private about the details of her diagnosis throughout. She did not share the type of cancer. She did not describe her treatment in clinical terms. She was not confessional in the way that public figures sometimes become confessional, the managed oversharing of a carefully constructed vulnerable moment. She was simply honest, the kind of honest that does not require an audience to be honest, that would have been honest even if nobody was watching. And because it carried that quality, the audience, which was enormous, felt it completely. People have known William and Kate as a pair since they were university students. They watched the relationship form from photographs taken outside nightclubs and at rugby matches, then watched it formalize through an engagement announced in an autumn garden, then watched it become a marriage in an abbey with the world gathered around every screen available. They watched the children arrive, George in 2013, with the particular English summer joy that a royal birth carries, Charlotte in 2015, Louis in 2018. And they watched the family grow in the way families grow, visibly and photographically, and through the formal occasions that the public life of royalty requires, but also through the small human evidence that good years leave on people. The ease of a couple in each other's company. The comfort of people who know each other very well. The particular quality of William looking at Kate, and Kate looking back that body language experts and tabloid commentators have been analyzing for years, but that anyone who has watched people who genuinely love each other recognized immediately, without needing a professional to name it. The year 2024 had done something to what people saw when they looked at them together. It had made William visible in a way he had sometimes struggled to be. He is a complicated public figure, the heir to an institution with a complicated history, carrying the particular inheritance of a man whose childhood was extraordinary and whose mother's death was the most public grief of a generation, a man who has spent his adult life working out what it means to be himself within the constraints of what he is required to be. He is sometimes awkward in the way that people who have been looked at their entire lives can be, aware of the looking in a way that occasionally makes the looking the thing you see rather than the person. But in 2024, the looking had caught something unguarded. His face at public events during the months of Kate's illness. The way he moved through obligatory occasions with the specific quality of a man who had somewhere more important to be and was doing the right thing by being here anyway. The word brutal in November, falling out of his mouth with the unguarded simplicity of exhaustion. He had been a husband, not performing husbandhood for the cameras, actually being one, the daily, unglamorous, necessary work of being present for someone who is ill, of managing fear while maintaining function, of keeping 3 children stable, and how while their mother went through something that no parenting manual addresses because no parenting manual can address it. He had said in November that he was proud of Kate, not as a statement designed for press consumption, but in the way people express pride when they have watched someone they love do something very hard. The pride of a witness. He had been there for all of it, the parts the cameras saw and the enormous parts they did not. When they arrived at the Charing Cross Hospital together on the 8th of January, 2025, for an engagement supporting NHS charities, Kate's first public appearance of the new year, a gentle return to the work of showing up for people who need something. A volunteer there mentioned the hours spent with patients during chemotherapy. Kate said, simply, I know. 2 words. Carrying everything they carried without explaining any of it. The volunteer understood. The room understood. The people who watched the footage later understood. She was not performing empathy. She had it. She had earned it in the particular way that only going through something earns it. Not borrowed, not imagined, not extended from a distance, but felt at the specific temperature that the experience itself burns at. This is what the year had given her. Not only the difficulty of it, the illness, the fear, the disruption to a life and a family and a public role, but the authority that comes from having been through the thing you're now standing in the middle of talking to people about. Kate had always connected well with the people she met in her public role. It was one of the things most consistently noted about her from the earliest years, the focus, the genuine interest, the ability to make a person feel seen in the often impersonal theater of an official engagement. But the connection that existed between her and the people she met in hospitals and communities and support groups in 2025 was different. Not in kind, but in depth. She was no longer coming to them from outside the experience. She was meeting them from inside it. The late months of 2024 and the early weeks of 2025 were, for William and Kate, a kind of reentry. Not the reentry of people who had been gone and were now simply returning to where they had been. The reentry of people who had been changed by an absence and were working out day by day and engagement by engagement how the changed versions of themselves fit into the requirements of the public life they were stepping back into. Kate was building what she had described as a new normal, figuring out the right balance between public duties and the recovery that had not ended on the day the chemotherapy stopped, that would continue in quieter and less visible ways for a long time. She had said as much directly and honestly. She was still figuring out what she could do and what she needed to protect and where the line between the two should fall on any given day. There is something in this that Britain recognized and held gently. The public appetite for royal visibility, for engagements and appearances, and the reassurance of seeing the people who carry these symbolic roles continuing to carry them is real and considerable. But it had been complicated in 2024 by something else, by having been brought into the private experience of illness in a way that the normal apparatus of royal distance does not accommodate. The people who had watched Kate's video in March, who had seen the truth in it, who had been moved by it in ways they had not anticipated, had been changed by the watching. They had been trusted with something. And the weight of that trust had not disappeared with the announcement of remission. If anything, it had made them more careful, more protective, more inclined to think about what they were watching when they watched, and what they owed to the person who had trusted them with the watching. A nation is not a single thing. It is not a unit that feels one emotion or holds one position or moves through collective experience with the unanimity that stories about nations tend to suggest. It is millions of individual people doing millions of individual things, carrying their own preoccupations and worries and joys, connected by shared circumstance and history and the loose ongoing agreement that they are somehow in the same story. But sometimes something happens that touches enough of those individual people in similar enough ways that you can speak of a shared experience without lying. The year that William and Kate moved through, the surgery, the diagnosis, the treatment, the gradual return, the remission was one of those things. It touched people who had not expected to be touched. It moved people who had no particular investment in the monarchy as an institution, but found themselves invested in these two people in ways that surprised them. It reached across the usual divisions of politics and class and generation and geography and found the common thing. The thing that sits beneath all the divisions and is too simple to be controversial. The fear of losing someone. The relief of not. They had stepped forward together through something that would have diminished many people. The illness and the fear and the year of managing a private catastrophe within the fishbowl of public life. They had come through it without appearing to break what was fundamental between them. The quality of their partnership, visible in the small ways that partnerships reveal themselves when they are genuine. The glance at the festival of remembrance. The closeness at trooping the color. The word proud, said about a wife by a husband who has watched her be incredibly brave. These things read as true because they are true, and the people watching them read them correctly. When Kate said she was in remission and looked forward to a fulfilling year ahead, she was saying it with the specific knowledge of someone who has spent a year not being certain that the year ahead existed. There's a texture to hope that has been interrupted and then returned to. It is not the same as hope that has never been tested. It has been through something. It carries its own history. The looking forward that Kate described in January 2025 was this kind. Earned, clear-eyed, not the easy optimism of someone who has never had reason to question whether the future will arrive, but the deliberate, grateful, determined, forward-looking of someone who has spent a year with the question open and is now, at last, able to close it. William said, simply, that there was much to look forward to. There are sentences that hold everything and require nothing more from the person who says them. This was one of those sentences, from a man who had described the year as brutal, who had held his family together through something he could not fix and could only be present for, who had shown up day after day in public and in private with the steadiness that the year had required of him. This was the exhale at the end of the long-held breath. There is much to look forward to. Britain heard it, all of it, the exhaustion beneath it, the relief in it, the love it was made of. And in the way that a nation receives the news it has been waiting for, with the quiet joy of something privately hoped for finally arriving in public form, it heard it as its own. Not just theirs and shared. The year had done that. The honesty of a video on a bench and a husband sitting close and the slow, real, undeniable return of a woman who had been genuinely missed. It had made something that is usually held at institutional distance into something that people felt they had been inside together. She was in remission. He was standing beside her. The children were somewhere growing up in the unremarkable way that children grow, oblivious to the adult weight of the year behind them, already moving forward into whatever the next one holds. And the country, which had learned in 2024 how much of itself it had quietly invested in these two people and what they represented, not the ceremony of royalty, but the human thing, the endurance thing, the still here, still together, still forward thing, carried the news home like something that had been given and intended to keep. There is nothing simple about what a royal family means to the people who watch it. The institution is old and complicated and carries the full weight of history, the good and the terrible of it, the pomp and the genuine service and the long shadow of everything that came before. People relate to it through 100 different lenses, some of them warm and some of them critical, and some of them simply confused about why any of it continues to matter in the way it does. But what happened in 2024, what happened between a diagnosis on a bench in Windsor and a remission in January, happened beneath all of that complexity in a place where people are simply people, where a woman is simply a woman and a man is simply a man, and they're going through something hard together, and the world is watching with the hope that they will make it through. They made it through. That was the story. That was all the story needed to be. And it was enough.